My husband was a decorated police chief who stole $5 million in cartel money from the police evidence room to disappear with his 25-year-old mistress. He set up an offshore account in my name, forged my signatures, and fully intended to leave me in federal prison while he sipped drinks in a country with no extradition treaty. What he didn't know was that I spent 30 years as a financial auditor. I had already found every file on that USB drive, and I donated his entire escape fund to the state orphanage on live television while he was standing at a podium talking about fighting cartel violence. He didn't just lose the money, he handed it to orphans and signed his name to the check. Welcome back to Secret Confessions, True Stories. If you love stories where a corrupt man's own plan becomes the weapon that destroys him, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now let me tell you how my husband accidentally became the most generous criminal in the history of this state, and how I walked out of that press room a free woman while the FBI walked him out in handcuffs. Marcus and I had been married for 25 years. I want to start there, with that number, because I think 25 years of a life built together deserves to be acknowledged before I tell you how it ended, even when the ending reveals that the building had cracks in it that I had not seen or had not wanted to see. We married when I was 30, when he was a young patrol officer with ambition and a way of commanding a room that made people trust him before he had given them a reason to. I was a financial auditor for a regional bank at the time, a job that requires a specific temperament: methodical, patient, comfortable with the slow accumulation of evidence toward a conclusion that you do not announce until you are certain. These qualities, as it turned out, would serve me very well at the end of our marriage. His rise was real. I want to be fair about that. He was a genuinely skilled law enforcement officer in the years when his character was still organized around doing the job correctly, rather than using the job for personal advantage. He closed cases. He built informant networks. He navigated departmental politics with the particular skill of someone who understood that advancement required both competence and the right relationships, and he cultivated both. I was not behind his career in the sense of pulling strings or making calls. I was behind it in the deeper sense, the operational infrastructure of a life that allowed him to do the visible work: the household, the social obligations, the financial management, the 25 years of small decisions made in service of a shared future. The affair was not subtle. I have spoken to other women in similar situations, and there is sometimes a question of whether they noticed. And the honest answer in my case is that I noticed, and I managed the noticing in the way that people manage things that are painful and have no clear resolution. Kayla was 25 years old and had joined the department 18 months before it all ended. She was beautiful in the specific way that men like Marcus find threatening about younger women. Not just attractively young, but confidently so, without the particular deference that women of my generation had often been conditioned to perform. He was not discreet. He did not take the calls in another room. He sometimes came home with the faint, particular carelessness of someone who has stopped trying to conceal something because they have decided that their position protects them from consequences. I had been a financial auditor for 30 years. One of the things you learn in that profession is when someone has decided their position protects them from consequences. It is a recognizable posture, and it is almost always the posture that precedes a catastrophic error. The USB drive was in his uniform jacket. He had left the jacket on the chair in the bedroom, which he would not normally have done, and the specific weight distribution of the jacket, the particular heaviness of one pocket relative to the other, registered to me in the way that small physical anomalies register to someone who has spent decades trained to notice what is inconsistent. I am not a naturally suspicious person. I am a person whose training makes inconsistencies visible against my will. The drive was small, the kind you can attach to a key ring, and it was encrypted with a password that was, I suspect, chosen by someone who was confident it would not be examined by someone with my background. He used variations of the same password schema for everything. I had noticed this over 25 years of shared digital life, the way you notice the habits of someone you have lived alongside. It took me 40 minutes and 3 attempts to access the files. I want to describe what I found and how I found it, because the technical details matter to understanding what I did next, and because I think there is something important about the fact that what undid him was not dramatic or emotional, but the slow, methodical application of exactly the professional skills he had watched me use for 30 years, without ever apparently considering that they might one day be applied to him. The first files were straightforward. Flight reservations, 2 tickets, departing in 4 days. Destination, a country whose relationship with international extradition law I recognized immediately as the reason for its selection. The tickets were in his name and Kayla's name. There were hotel reservations, also in their names, for a property in a coastal city in a country where a person with sufficient cash can live very comfortably and very anonymously. The financial files were more complex and more instructive. He had established, through a series of shell company intermediaries that showed the guidance of someone with professional financial structuring assistance, an offshore account in a jurisdiction known for its banking secrecy. The account had been established 9 months prior. The beneficial owner of the account, as documented in the files, was me, not Marcus, not a shared account, not a business entity. Me, personally, with my full legal name and identification details, and with forged signatures on the establishment documents that were competent enough to pass ordinary scrutiny, but that I could see, with the particular eye of someone who has reviewed fraudulent documents professionally for 3 decades, were not mine. The account balance was $5,200,000. The deposits had been made in 4 tranches over 7 months, each structured to avoid automatic reporting thresholds, a technique I recognized from fraud cases I had reviewed during my career. The money had come from an intermediary account that itself traced back to a series of cash deposits that corresponded, in timing and in approximate amount, to a period during which I knew, from public departmental records, that a significant cartel evidence seizure had been processed through the department Marcus led. He had stolen cartel money from the police evidence room. He had put it in an offshore account in my name, with my forged signatures. And in 4 days, he and Kayla were going to board a plane and leave me as the documented beneficial owner of $5 million in criminally obtained funds, in an account that was already structured to look like money I had been accumulating through financial crimes of my own. I sat with this information for a long time. I want to be precise about what I felt, because I think it is important to be accurate about the emotional experience of a moment like this, rather than to simplify it into something more legible. There was grief, which I had been carrying in various forms for months, and which this simply clarified and deepened. There was anger, which arrived clean and cold rather than hot, the way anger arrives when you are past surprise and into the specific territory of someone who understands exactly what is in front of them. And underneath both of those things, there was something that I can only describe as the particular professional clarity that comes when a complex situation resolves into a set of concrete, solvable problems. I am a retired financial auditor. I did not call the police. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. I sat down at my computer with a cup of coffee, and I began to work. The offshore account was the key, and accessing it required working backward through the shell company structure that had been used to establish it. This is not simple, but it is also not as impenetrable as people who use these structures tend to believe, because every layer of a shell company structure requires documentation, and documentation leaves traces, and traces are the professional habitat of someone like me. The company that had established the account had been incorporated in a jurisdiction that required minimal disclosure, but was not completely opaque. There were filing records, there were agent relationships, there were communication logs that could be accessed through the administrative portals of the intermediary companies, if you had the right credentials. I had spent 3 decades dealing with financial institutions, regulatory bodies, and corporate service providers. I knew how these systems were structured. I knew where the administrative access points were. I knew that the person who had set this up, however competent in the mechanics of the thing, had not anticipated that the nominal beneficial owner of the account would herself be a person with 30 years of financial forensics experience, and the specific technical literacy to navigate the back end of the structure. It took me 11 hours. I worked through the night, methodically, the way I had always worked on complex audit cases. Not rushing, not taking shortcuts, documenting each step with the habit of someone who understands that documentation is the foundation of everything that follows. By 4 in the morning, I had administrative control of the account. By 5, I had verified that the control was complete and that the transfers I was about to initiate would execute cleanly. I did not keep the money. I want to be clear about this because the question of what I did with it is the heart of the story. I had $5 million under my administrative control, money that was criminally obtained and that was sitting in an account in my name that had been designed to destroy me. Keeping it would have been another crime. Reporting it to the police department he led would have been reporting it to the institution he controlled. Neither option was available to me. What was available to me was the State Orphanage Foundation, a publicly registered charitable organization that I had been aware of through community involvement, whose bank details were publicly accessible on their registered charity filing, and whose donation processing system could accept electronic transfers of the kind I was about to make. I transferred the full balance, $5,200,000, to the foundation at 5:17 in the morning. The transfer executed cleanly. And then I did the thing that transformed a financial transfer into something else entirely. I registered the donation. In the United States, charitable donations above certain thresholds require documentation for tax purposes, and the documentation is submitted to state tax authorities and generates a public record. I completed the donation registration with full legal formality, listing the donors by name. Marcus, in his capacity as police chief, and Kayla as his listed associate. I included the account details from which the funds had originated. I submitted the registration electronically, which meant it was time-stamped, filed, and would generate an automatic acknowledgement to both the state tax authority and the foundation's donor records. The foundation would receive notification of the donation, along with the donor details, by 9 in the morning. The state tax authority would receive the filing and would generate a public record. A donation of $5 million from a police chief would not go unnoticed. I went to bed at 6:15. I slept for 3 hours. I got up, dressed carefully, and prepared to be a supportive wife at a press conference. The press conference had been scheduled for 10 in the morning and had been organized around the theme of cracking down on cartel violence in the state, which I noted, sitting in the front row with my phone in my lap, was the kind of irony that writes itself. Marcus was at the podium, polished in his dress uniform, delivering remarks that he had been preparing for weeks, and that he was clearly experiencing as a final performance, the last official act of a career he was about to abandon. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who had a plan. His phone was on the podium. I could see from the front row that he had not yet looked at it. The zero balance alert from the offshore bank would have arrived at some point after 5:17. He had not noticed it yet. I watched the door. The governor entered at 10:23, accompanied by his communications staff, 2 state-level officials I recognized, a cluster of photographers, and a production assistant carrying what I can only describe as the largest novelty check I have ever seen in person. The kind used at charity presentations, oversized, with the amount printed in large figures and the donor name printed clearly across the front. The room, which had been attentive to the police chief's remarks about cartel interdiction, shifted entirely. Cameras that had been focused on the podium swung toward the governor. The press corps, trained to recognize when the actual story has entered the room, moved instinctively. Marcus stopped speaking mid-sentence. The governor was gracious and warm and entirely in possession of his narrative. He thanked the press corps for their patience, apologized for the interruption, and said that he had an announcement that simply could not wait, because when a public servant makes a contribution of this magnitude to the children of this state, it needed to be recognized immediately and publicly. He described the donation, $5,200,000 to the State Orphanage Foundation, received that morning. the largest single charitable gift in the foundation's history. He named the donors. He held up the novelty check. I watched Marcus's face from the front row, and I want to try to describe what happened to it, because it happened over a period of perhaps 8 seconds, and it was, in its way, the complete arc of a particular kind of reckoning. The first second was incomprehension, the expression of someone hearing their name attached to a statement that does not compute. The second second was the beginning of processing, something behind his eyes beginning to run the calculation. The third and fourth seconds were the calculation completing, arriving at the answer, the specific moment when a person understands simultaneously what has happened, what it means, and what they have lost. He looked at his phone. The zero balance alert was there. $5,200,000 transferred at 5:17 that morning. The account he had built over 9 months, the escape fund, the plan, gone. Donated in his name to orphans on live television with a tax filing that was already in the state record and could not be undone. He also understood in that moment that the cartel whose money he had taken knew exactly what he had taken and had been waiting to see what he did with it. And what he had done with it, according to the public record, was give it to orphans. The cartel did not care about the orphans. The cartel cared about their money, and the money was gone. And the man who had taken it was standing at a podium on live television with his name on a novelty check. An investigative reporter in the third row, a woman I recognized as someone who had been covering police department corruption for the regional paper for several years, had her laptop open. She was typing quickly, and I could see from the angle of her screen that she was comparing numbers. The $5 million from the donation. The $5 million from the evidence room seizure that had been reported as unaccounted for in a departmental audit published 3 months earlier. The timing. The account details in the public tax filing. She raised her hand. The question she asked was precise, factual, and devastating. She asked the governor whether the account details listed on the charitable donation filing corresponded to an offshore account structure similar to those used in financial crimes investigations. And she asked the police chief whether he would like to comment on the fact that the amount of the donation was exactly equal to the unaccounted funds from the evidence room seizure described in the departmental audit. The room erupted. Marcus gripped the podium. He said something that was not a sentence. Kayla, who was standing to the side of the room in her department dress uniform, looked at her phone, looked at Marcus, and made the decision that people make in real time when they understand that the person standing next to them has just become a liability. She stepped back. She stepped further back. She was already speaking to someone on her phone when the first internal affairs officer entered the room. The FBI agents came in through the side door. Marcus was arrested at the podium. He was handcuffed, in his dress uniform, in front of every camera in the room, on live television, in the middle of a press conference about fighting cartel violence, while the governor stood to one side, holding a novelty check made out in Marcus's name for $5 million given to orphans. I stood up from the front row. I walked toward the exit. A deputy I recognized held the door for me. I thanked him and walked into the corridor and then outside into the morning. I want to leave you with what I have concluded about this, because I have thought about it a great deal in the months since. The best way to expose a corrupt man is not to confront him directly, because direct confrontation gives him time to prepare, to manage the narrative, to deploy the resources and relationships he has accumulated in service of protecting himself. The institutions around him will protect him. The people who owe him will protect him. His own confidence in his untouchability will arm him. The better way is to use his own structure against him, to take the thing he built for his protection and turn it into the thing that destroys him, so cleanly and completely that by the time he understands what has happened, the public record already exists and cannot be altered. To make him, in the eyes of the state and the cameras and the permanently filed tax documentation, the most generous donor in the Foundation's history. To give him credit, publicly and irrevocably, for the best thing his money ever did. He stole from evidence. He forged my name. He planned to leave me in federal prison while he lived comfortably in a country that would never send him back. And instead, he is in federal prison himself. The cartel is looking for money that no longer exists in any recoverable form, and the state orphanage received the largest single donation in its history. The children are taken care of. The corrupt man is accountable. The forged signatures in my name were the first evidence reviewed in the federal investigation, and they were reviewed by people who understood immediately that a woman who had spent 30 years as a financial auditor had not made the specific errors that appeared in those documents. I walked out. I was never charged. I was never even seriously questioned once the investigation got 3 days in. The best accounting I ever did was the work I did between midnight and 5 in the morning on a Thursday in spring, with a cup of coffee and 30 years of knowing exactly how money moves and where it leaves traces and what to do when the traces belong to you. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment. I read every one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next confession.